Okay. Opponents of this bill said during debate that basically this will just raise utility rates, do nothing about acid rain coming in from other states, and the cost will be more than any benefits.
We believe that this bill will significantly reduce sulfur emissions in New York and have a pretty major impact on acid rain in New York State. Most importantly, it sends a message to Washington that New York is committed to cleaning up the acid rain problem, and we believe with experience it will show that there may be a moderate increase in utility prices, but if utilities are also committed to reducing the acid rain problem, they can do it in a cost-effective manner.
It's bound to be passed on to consumers, though, who are already very concerned about their utility bills. So is paying, even if it's just a bit more in New York, really worth it if the rest of the country's not following?
Well, I think you really need to look at the overall energy mix. If you don't have projects like Shoreham and 9 Mile 2 underway, the increase in rates is pretty minor. If there is a deep commitment to energy conservation with a mix of some commitment to reducing sulfur emissions, ratepayers don't have to necessarily feel a rate increase. It's a much more complicated issue where you have to look at the total energy mix, not just this one bill.
In your range of environmental concerns this year, where did this bill rank?
This acid rain legislation was one of our top priorities. It did go through some significant amendments. We had hoped for a stronger bill, but we are very pleased with this bill and are optimistic that it will have a good impact on the national debate. New York is one of the only states to pass state acid rain legislation.
Okay. Let me get just look, 1, 2, 3, 4, don't smile, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30.
Environmentalists, however legitimate, fail to capture popular support. Our ecological consciences, it sometimes seems, are poorly developed. The fate of species like the Connor blue butterfly or the snail darter is not a great concern to many, especially when those species stand in the way of human progress or appear to. But one environmental issue is different, or at least ought to be, because it affects every one of us and because the decisions we make now will determine the environment we leave to our children and to our grandchildren and to theirs. Acid rain is a national problem, but the effects of it are as acutely felt here in New York as anywhere in the United States. The greatest damage has been in the rugged and magnificent Adirondack Mountain region, where over 200 lakes and ponds are already too sour to support any fish, and hundreds more are in danger of becoming contaminated. And the damage isn't confined to the Adirondacks. The Hudson Highlands and the Catskill Mountains have also suffered. Indeed, across the state, lakes and mountain ranges and forests, precious resources preserved across generations with great effort and at great expense, are every day put in jeopardy. Acid rain is even taking a growing toll on cities as well as woodlands, eating into marble and granite and metal, rotting away public monuments. We haven't begun to measure the ill effect it might be having on our health. We know already that in parts of upstate New York, acid rain has been affecting the drinking water. Residents of these areas have been admonished to flush their domestic water supply lines before drinking from them. Of course, much of the pollution that forms acid rain is brought here from the Midwest on the prevailing westerly winds. We've asked the federal government to act in abating it. But in the meantime, as a state, we're acting on our own. As a matter of fact, since 1968, New York has reduced sulfur dioxide emissions by approximately 50%. That's about 1 million tons. During a period of growth in electric power generation, we've applied and enforced some of the strongest air pollution control regulations in the entire country. The bill I'll sign today takes us a step further. Its provisions are complex, but their aim is a simple one: to attack acid rain at its cause. When the provisions of this bill have been fully implemented, sulfur emissions in New York will have been reduced by 25 to 30%, or approximately 245,000 tons annually. This is a realistic bill. This is not a naive bill. It recognizes the economic difficulties involved in reducing sulfur emissions. It's realistic, but it's tough. It allows us to begin a job that needs to be done. We believe other states should enact similar statutes, and will continue to urge the federal government to act against this threat to the environment, which it alone has both the authority and the resources to end. But in the meantime, this bill will signal to all New York's, signal to all, this state's resolve to do everything it can to help itself, to sacrifice today for goals that transcend the practical moment, for gains that will benefit tomorrow's New Yorkers. We're indebted to all who worked to pass this bill, particularly to its sponsor. Repetition. I remind you that in this state, a governor can't make a law without the legislature. And in this state, the legislature can make a law without the governor. I encourage them every time they appear. I'm delaying so that more...
Thank you, Governor.
In this state, it only happens when the legislature and the governor, it only happens well when the legislature and the governor get together. This bill was not a program bill. We did put $100,000 in the budget and asked, please, to sign it. It's a good bill. It's got to be reminded today that this is a state of many different parts, and their interdependence is obvious and complex. We need two houses to agree before we have a bill, and one of them is dominated by the Republicans and the other dominated no bills. And that means unless upstaters and downstaters and men and women and blacks and whites and all kinds of people come together in this complex society we call New York State, there is no progress. And when you have progress like this, it means the system worked well. That by itself is a small miracle. Let me present to you some of the people who represent that system at its best. One of them, a Republican from the state Senate, a sponsor of this bill, one of our leading legislators, Senator John Dunn.
Thank you, Senator.
I think the governor has said it all very well. And knowing that I wanted to be adequately prepared, I immediately sought some encouragement or some support from people like Thomas Aquinas or St. Augustine, but since they were relatively silent on the subject, I thought that perhaps it might be appropriate today to place this legislation, which I think the governor has correctly characterized as something very substantive, not make-believe, but a very real piece of legislation, in terms of its brief history which began about 18 months ago when the Council to the Senate Environmental
contribution in this field. When a legislator from the Hudson Valley, Assemblyman Hinchey, and a lawmaker from Suffolk County, and the governor invites them all, it is an issue of primary concern to the entire population of New York State. Congratulations.
A minor inadvertence was set.
The New York State members of the United States Congress, both Republicans and Democrats, and I want to assure each and every one of you that the message that we send from the state of New York today to the other 49 states is extremely important. And once again, as I've said always, we have been the pathfinders and the leaders, and we will continue to be under the leadership of the men behind me. Thank you very much.
We, of course, we have Commissioner Hank Williams of the Department of Environmental Conservation and Bill Cotter of our Energy.
Are you in?
Okay.
Very good. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you, fellas. Well done.
That's the one.
Take this pen. Keep this. We're going to get a good one if I can torture some money out of you guys.
Thank you for inviting us.
Now let's see if you why don't maybe you can stay a little bit, you experts. If you have questions, on the acid rain bill, I'll ask these gentlemen to stay behind, Maurice, just so that I don't say anything that embarrasses you. If you have any questions on acid rain, I'll take any other questions, but first let's dispose of this subject if we may, so we don't have to hold them. Eric?
What's the administration's estimate of the cost of compliance, both overall over the period that the new standards come into effect, and then per ratepayer in the upstate utility areas?
Come on.
It ranges from 160 million to 1.6 billion. And this depends, of course, upon a wide variety of factors, all of which are spelled out in some of the material that are related to the press coverage that was provided. I assume some was provided. This does cover some of the studies that we made over a long period of time, we meaning the Department of Environmental Conservation.
Translate to cost to consumers?
But you don't have numbers that discrete. And let's understand that this is all going to be the subject of a whole series of public hearings. Okay? Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
Governor Cuomo, I'm with the Sierra Club, and while we appreciate what you've done here in New York, we think it's a marvelous step forward. We're trying to get Congress, as you've all indicated, that we need something done in Congress. And the Sierra Club is involved in a national postcard campaign, and I'm wondering if you would take a moment and sign a postcard for us.
Do I have any choice at all? Is there any way I can escape this? Can I go to my lawyers? No? All right.
It's very innocuous.
Well, you know, we normally don't allow people who aren't members of the LCA to participate at this stage. But having dealt with the LCA, it's a delight to turn to you. Address? You want the Albany address or the Queens address? Which works better? 138 Eagle Street, Albany, New York.
They'll send you the bill for
Yeah,
$100.
that's right.
You'll get our
Thank you. Tell me your name. Tell me your name. Thank you very much. Do you have any other questions? Okay, that's all on acid rain. Thank you very much. Thanks. Thanks, John. Thanks. Yeah, thanks. Okay. I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Would you entertain questions about other matters?
Whatever you like.
All right.
Excuse me.
Two questions. One dealing with Geraldine Ferraro's position when it comes to her husband and income taxes. Do you think that will damage the Democratic ticket, at least in the eyes of the Republicans, it would seem so?
One is, Congresswoman Ferraro says it wasn't her decision, it was John Zaccaro's decision. Number two, I would suspect that for the time being, it is at the very least a distraction on the campaign. We want to be talking about deficits. We want to be talking about much more important issues. This allows the Republicans to distract us from those issues where they're vulnerable, and to that extent it is not useful. But I don't regard it as major, and I think by the time this campaign is over, it will be one of a series of events that we wish hadn't occurred, but that won't be determinants.
One other question. President Reagan's remarks prior to broadcast.
More or less in the same category, I think, and not a good thing for President Reagan. It has apparently caused more upsetment outside of the United States than here in the United States. For myself personally, I commented last night that it reminds me of something my father used to say about at the base of every joke is a little kernel of truth as you perceive it. And I was just a little bit disconcerted that even casually, he should choose to make a joke about bombing Russia. Now, that is not to suggest that that's his policy and he's giving up his nether self and that that's the real, not at all. But I must tell you that it's disconcerting. Even when you choose to make jokes, you choose to make jokes about bombing Russia. I wish he hadn't done it. And I don't think it's going to help him, but I don't think it's going to kill his chances in this campaign either.
Is it better to make jokes about Italian husbands, do you think?
I wouldn't want that choice.
What should Congresswoman Ferraro do to get rid of this distraction?
I don't know.
Do you think one way to get rid of it is to have John Zucchero release his tax returns?
Do you have any
No.
advice for her?
Tell the truth, which apparently she's doing.
Well, do you think that there's any reason why the spouse of a candidate for president or vice president should be required to
I
release?
think Mrs. Bush should produce all her tax
I think
returns.
maybe Vice President Bush should too.
Oh, sure. Mrs. Bush should come forward if John should. I think the rule should be the same for everybody.
Do you think either one of them should have to, though?
I don't know. That's not the law.
Do you think?
I think you follow the law.
Do you think Matilda Cuomo should have to come forward and release a tax return because you were running for governor?
We chose to do it, not because it was the law. But then it's easy for people like us. We didn't have that much money. It's very easy. You know, it's easy for me to lord it over. Everybody said, well, we released our tax return. We had 12 cents. It was an embarrassment. Okay? Thank you very much.
No, Governor.
Governor,
Cynthia.
This morning in your radio show, there was...
I deny it.
That's what you said. However, there is a discrepancy in your talk with us on Friday in regards to the bishop's statement. He said that if you go back to the 1840 and discover that the bishops of this country found that slavery was immoral, nor did they stand up at the time of the Holocaust when Jews were being thrown into ovens. Surely that was a sin. Abortion was a sin. Why wasn't bishops lined up everywhere demanding that President Roosevelt do something?
What is the discrepancy?
Well,
That's what I said this morning.
You said that you didn't say that.
Oh, no, I didn't say that at all. You're mistaken. You don't need to apologize, but you're mistaken.
You just said
What is the discrepancy?
When you were asked this morning on the radio show if there was if you had criticized...
I didn't criticize. I said the Holocaust was a sin, not the bishop's failure to stand up for it. So it was your misunderstanding. I didn't say their refusal to stand up for slavery was a sin. I said just the opposite. I said they made a political judgment on slavery, Archbishop Carroll, which was that there was no point in going forward for a constitutional amendment because it would have divided this nation in half in 1840. I didn't criticize the church for doing that. I said, if you look closely at your notes, that surely that was a sin, meaning the Holocaust, not that the bishops didn't speak out against it. Okay? I hope that reconciles it for you. Yeah.
on another topic, state revenues. It looks like we're going to come out with a little bit more of a surplus than what we're going to have.
Who said so?
Well,
Looks like from what?
You don't, I think...
No, you said it looks like. From what?
Well, from what your budget office indicates that the possibility exists that we're going to have some money left over at the end of the...
Reducing the spring borrowing.
We should do both.
How can we do that?
Depends on how much we have. How much will we have?
Well, if we go along, let's say we have $500 million. How much would you want to apply to one or the other?
I don't know. I'd have to work it out. But it's possible if you have enough money, you could do both.
50-50?
As a matter of fact, we have said a number of times we're for a constitutional amendment that would limit the debt, and we're striving for gap balance. We said that before the surplus.
Okay, so would that be your first priority?
Oh, no, I don't know. I don't, as you know, I don't like to do it that way this early with 3/4 of the year still to go.
Well, when would you like to do it?
When I'm ready.
Budget message of next year?
Oh, we'll certainly do it before we announce the budget.
Okay, would you like to do it before the election?
Which election?
The one coming up in November?
Well, we won't even have, how many quarters will we have? It's kind of early, isn't it?
What if some legislators want to do it before?
I don't blame them, they're running.
Do you think that's
I think what the
appropriate for them to do
legislators
that?
should do is to say, we should have a tax cut, and we should reduce the deficit, plus we should put more money in the fight against crime.
Do you think that's a realistic thing to do?
Sure, we did it. Put more money in the fight against crime, we did all those things. I think they should say it.
Can you do it in time for Christmas?
Hanukkah and Christmas, perhaps.
Have you investigated who Jericho is yet?
What, I don't know what you're referring to.
A piece on the op-ed page of the Times today. You haven't seen it?
I've seen it, and Matilda has seen it. I thought it was in poor taste, but that's not unusual.
Any ideas on who wrote it?
No. Some people have some pretty good guesses, but I don't want to be distracted by figuring out who it is.
What are the good guesses on the Jew herd?
That's not important. Anybody else? Yes.
Is trying to get Congress, was trying to get the Senate to get some tax revisions.
Senator D'Amato, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yes, trying to get some tax
Legislation. I recall a couple of years ago, President Reagan saying there'd be $2 billion for prisons. Remember, prison program? And the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court said, wonderful idea. And we said, hurrah, and I said, let me see the money, and it never came. You know, it's very, very common in election years, especially immediately before the election. It is politics, as usual. That'll free up some of our money to do other things with. And as I've said over and over, most of the crime is drug-related. That means most of the crime is international. The federal government, therefore, has an obligation it's not meeting, and we wouldn't ask them to send marshals and troops here, but we would ask them to do the right thing by sending us a little money so that we can spend less money on police and criminals and jails and courts, and more money on things like acid rain.
Have you ever entertained that idea as an option in New York State?
I don't know exactly financing of prisons, because we didn't have a prison bond issue. That was challenged by NYPIRG, and I'm delighted that our lawyers won that case. That was, that's not quite to the
Mortgage which the state gives out, the mortgages.
It has been a successful program that meets a need of lower middle-class people that I don't know. You know, kind of ironic and confusing to me that you ought not to help the middle class, which is what Senator Dole appears to be saying. You ought to have an income limit on it. At what level? They have to pay the mortgage back.